Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Welcome, welcome to this mental health for all webinar. Please introduce yourself to the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself on the chat option. Tell us your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from. And welcome to the session. As we start, as I mentioned, this is the Mental Health for All webinar. And our theme this time is Youth Reimagining Leadership in Mental Health. This conversation couldn't be more urgent because right now, anxiety and depression alone make up the 40% of the global burden of disease among adolescents. Then, more than 1 in 7 young people are living with a mental health condition like depression, anxiety, or behavioral disorders. And for most of us, these issues start early, half before the age of 18, and almost two-thirds before we turn 25. And every year, nearly 45,800 adolescents die by suicide. That's one young life lost every 11 minutes, making suicide the third leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 29, and the rates are rising. But yet, we are seeing that youth mental health remains underfunded across prevention, care, and even research. And the gap between what's needed and what is available is massive. But here's what we know: young people aren't just passive recipients of mental health support. We are already leading, and in our schools, in our communities, and in our online spaces. We know what's working and what's not, and what needs to change. So today we are going to delve a little bit deeper beyond the buzzwords like youth leader or change maker. We want to go and discover the real lived leadership, the kind that comes from navigating systems that weren't designed with us in mind and still choosing to show up with care and courage. As this world shifts demographically, politically, and economically, we are stepping into roles that generations before us didn't have to carry in the same way, and there's the largest wealth transfer in history that is happening in our lifetime. But with that comes a responsibility to reimagine systems and not just inherit them. So, as we begin, I'd invite you to breathe in, breathe out, listen deeply to the voices here, not as the future leaders, but as the current leaders reshaping our mental health spaces today. So, let's get into it. My name is Njoroge, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I will be facilitating an amazing panel today, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. I personally work for Integrative Wellbeing and the Resilience Project, and yes, currently based in Nairobi, Kenya, as I said before. So, for our panelists, I'd love you to share your name, the organization where you work, where you're currently based, and maybe we can do a little check in of your go to self care activity. I'll start with Kat in the order of my screen. Kat, over to you.
Thanks, Judah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kat. I'm based in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and currently I'm a psychology student at RMIT University. But I'm also the founder of Embrace Vietnam, which is a community project trying to address eco anxiety among Vietnamese youth. And I'm very honored to be here with this amazing panel. My self care activity is I love playing badminton in the weekend.
Thank you so much, Kat. I love that. Let's go to Anne. Anne, over to you.
Thanks, Judah. Hello, everyone. My name is Anne-Sharlene, and I'm Zimbabwean based in South Africa. I am the founder of Kurapa Moyo, which is an organization that is contextualizing wellness to the realities of African women. And we do that through community care as well as intention. And I'm super excited to be here. I would say one of my favorite go to self care tips is just making time to watch the moon because it's a great reminder of how, everything happens in different phases and cycles, and sometimes we just need to ride it out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. And next we're going to Erica.
Thanks, Judah, and hi, everyone. My name is Erica, and I'm calling in from Toronto, Canada this morning. I'm a Program Operations Associate at Grand Challenges Canada, and I support the Being Initiative, which is our youth mental health initiative focused on prevention and promotion. I'm super excited to be here today, and I really look forward to this conversation with some new and familiar faces. So thank you for having me. My go-to self-care is always a walk and some music. That never seems to fail me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica, for that. And lastly but not least, Jackie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Judah. So my name is Jaclyn Schess, but I go by Jackie. I am the founder at Generation Mental Health. We're a youth-led nonprofit building a generation of youth leaders in mental health. So really excited to be here for this conversation. I am currently calling in from Bali, Indonesia, where I'm luckily able to attend a conference, and I'm generally based in the US. As far as a self-care activity, cuddling with my dog.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I have had the list of the self-care activities. Please, if I steal yours, I'm just trying it out. Uh, yes, if you're joining us still, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, your organization, where you're coming from, and we'd love to hear more about you. So, getting into the questions. For the first question, I'd want us to focus on what we hear about. We hear a lot about youth being at the forefront of change, the forefront of activities. But what does that actually look like in your hands, in your community, and in your context? And for that question, I'll start with Anne. Anne, what does youth being at the forefront look like for you?
I would say for me, it just means not waiting for permission, because I think it's something that as young people we tend to do. We wait for somebody else to co-sign our ability to lead and solve problems, etc. And so being at the forefront means that I identified the problem, and the fact that I identified it as a problem means that I do actually have the capacity and the mind to maybe even ideate a solution and find or identify people that I can work with in order to implement that solution. So definitely not waiting for permission to start leading. And I think also when we think of leading, we imagine it as this thing that we do where we're at the forefront and there's dozens of people behind us. But leadership is co-creation. So you have the idea, find people to support you, and in you co-creating with them, you're actually leading.
Oh wow, I love what you bring up. That yes, we are demanding for space, but it's also an avenue for co-creation and working together with people. I love that. Seeing a couple of nods and hearing some work about Kat, the work that you do in Vietnam. Will you care to contribute to that question and also tell us how you're co-creating and you that being at the forefront of leadership in Embrace?
Yeah, I think Anne-Charlene actually just said it so perfectly. So I'll just add to the question, because you also ask what it looks like, not only in my hands but also in my community. And so um, I think that when people ask what mental health advocacy means, I usually compare it to a board game, especially the life board game. Um, for a bit of context, if you've never played life before, it's essentially a board game where you can make different life decisions, like whether you want to go to college or go straight into work, or you want to become a surgeon or a teacher or take loans. And eventually that leads you into like very different life courses. Um, but what I'm trying to say is, um, there are so many, like just like that board game, there are so many different ways you can navigate in this space, and you can meaningfully contribute. Like you can be a student starting a mental health project in your community. You can also be an educator training the next generation of mental health professionals. You can also be a policy makers trying to make mental health care more accessible. And so I think that's what I would like to emphasize, that there are many different ways to meaningfully contribute to this space, not necessarily that you have to be a project leader of some sort, and even myself as a project leader of the Embrace, I view myself as only um, adding to, like, a small piece of action, adding to the whole effort.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Kat, reminding us that there are very many ways to meaningfully engage in the space, and we all have a way we can be able to meaningfully contribute. I'd love to pass it over to Jackie and Erica, starting with Jackie. Both of you are mainly based in the global north, and we've had some perspectives from the global south and how youth are showing up. So I'd love to know, in your context, what does showing up mean? What does youth at the forefront mean? Jackie, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Judah. And definitely going to be just building right off of what we've already heard. I think for me, like personally, and thinking about my positionality as someone coming from the global south as a, sorry, can you pass it to Erica for a second and we'll come back to
Yes,
me?
yes, thank you. Erica, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Judah. So yeah, I really love what Kat and Anne have shared so far, and I think maybe for me this will sound a little bit different. As I mentioned, I work on the Being Initiative, and Being works with young people to improve their mental health and well-being by funding and supporting research, innovation, and ecosystem building in 12 countries around the world. But definitely want to recognize our position as more of a funder in this work. But I think what's really important to us, and what we keep really core to our beliefs, is that we believe that people closest to the challenges are best placed to identify barriers and needs and come up with impactful, scalable solutions. I think as we've all recognized, youth really know what's best for their mental health. And so for us, youth at the forefront means a few different things. It means that youth are driving our funding priorities. They were part of the core group that helped us understand what was really needed in each of these 12 countries, and that's what we're moving to fund. And then youth themselves are the ones innovating and driving change within their community. So they are receiving the funding to scale up and test their innovations that are supporting youth mental health. And then I think finally, youth perspectives guide and shape all of our work and our decision making. And this is done primarily through a youth and lived experience advisory group, of which we're lucky enough that Jackie is a part of. So glad that she can be here today as well. But I think for me, living those values of youth led, especially in that last example of youth within advisory groups or shaping decisions, it's not always without its challenges. And part of keeping youth at the forefront for me also means that sometimes we won't get it right from the start, but being open to learning continuously and learning from youth and their experiences is what's really important in that. So I think we've done that, and we've shared our approach and our learnings in a report that was published in May that we co-authored with our advisors, reflecting on what went well and how we could shape those learnings to improve our engagements and our collaboration to, again, really make sure that youth are leading the work that we're doing. And so I think a link to that will be shared in the chat. But yeah, that's what that looks like in our space.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Erica, for bringing that up. That we're also learning in the process, and we need to capture those moments where we're learning and advance the work that we do. Back to you, Jackie.
So sorry about that. So it's really great to hear from Erica, and I've had the pleasure of being the co-chair of the youth advisory group at Being. But I think that GenMH comes from a different perspective in terms of that we are a youth-led organization ourselves that are also seeking to support youth-led organizations. And so I think the unique angle that we're really trying to take is to say, we agree, right, that like young people know what's best for their mental health, but also feel that young people are best positioned to identify the barriers to actually serving in these roles. But also giving us the space to, as Kat was saying, to shape youth leadership within our organization. So, by far, the way I see my role and the way I see GenMH's role is sort of creating the enabling environments for youth to be able to be involved directly in decisions that impact their lives, right? And that could be serving on advisory groups, that could be helping to run a program in an existing organization, that could be starting their own organization. But really seeing this sort of democratization of power and bringing power to young people. And that can be done from non-youth led organizations. But I do think that, the position that many of us are taking here is that youth led organizations are able to bring something unique to the table.
Oh, wow. I love beautiful perspectives from everyone. I love that we're talking about the sense of agency and how a person is able to choose what they want to do, and what they want to define their leadership as. That's really beautiful. And piggybacking on what you just said, and seeing all the roles represented here, all the passion that's represented here, I'd love to dive into the second question, which is, what helped you step into your role? What are those barriers that exist or existed when you stepped into your role? And what are they visible? Are they invisible barriers? I know we all get our motivation from somewhere and our passion from somewhere. So I do believe my context is what allowed me to step into the role I currently serve in. So I'd love to hear from you. What called you to the role that you're currently serving? Uh, Going to Anne, passing it to Anne. Oh, Anne, you're muted. Oh, as we sort that out, maybe Jackie, will you start for us, and then we sort. Perfection is the enemy, people. As we sort that out, Jackie, please start it out for us.
Uh, Sorry, can you restate one more time?
Yeah, what barriers existed and what called you to start your role, and are these barriers, were they invisible or invisible? Do they still exist now?
Right, absolutely. So, um, I think for me, what's at the forefront is my own lived experience with mental health challenges. That started for me at a very young age. But I also had the sort of enabling environment of, being in a situation where I could access mental health support. And then I think a big turning point for me was at university, seeing that the peer led solutions on my university campus were actually the ones that made the most impact on my mental health. And that, and I had some initial opportunities to speak about my lived experience while I was a university student. And even in that, that was a sort of leadership opportunity, right? This like advocacy, taking agency over the experience. And it was those initial experiences that really started to show me how important this piece of agency, as you said, really is for our recovery. And that's one of the ways that we think about it at GenMH is that being involved in advocacy and systems change can be really actually helpful for your mental health journey in a lot of ways. So that like really is what pushed me into it. I think the barriers that exist are a lot of the barriers that GenMH is trying to address, trying to enter into formal circles of other organizations that are not youth led, doing youth focused interventions. Sometimes you don't get the respect. And I think that there's a lot of, adultism in terms of thinking that young people, you might have some ideas, but like don't belong at the decision making table. And we've definitely, I'm sure we've all seen that. And so part of what we're doing here is trying to break down that barrier.
Oh, I love that. So it's not just about opening the door for young people; it's also giving them a seat on the table. Yeah, I love that. Going over to Kat, what barriers existed? What called you into this space? Do they still exist now? Oh, sorry, you're muted too.
Oh, sorry. In terms of barriers, I think that there remains a lot of barriers for young people to lead mental health projects in Vietnam. Um, and I have to say that, like I acknowledge that I myself have a lot of privileges to start my own mental health project, um, and still I still find it difficult. And so, in my context, you can find issues like young people are so passionate to start their own project, but it's hard to sustain them because they have to navigate, they have to balance both what they're doing in school and also running a project that is usually are not funded. um, you also have to navigate a developing industry, which means there is no clear roadmap, and you just have to figure things out along the way, or you have to create your own opportunities. And I really hope that in the future, maybe when the mental health ecosystem is clearer in Vietnam, young people will have more opportunities to engage in these conversations. Um, and finally, I think that like in the context of embrace, we're really trying, but um, we're still facing challenge in terms of how do we involve everyone in our community into the design of um, of a what we call a community solution, because it's very hard to get all representation, especially representation from traditionally marginalized group into the picture. And we've tried a lot of ways through contacting, for example, non NGOs or NPOs working with those specific groups, but still, it's, we're still facing challenges trying to create opportunities or meaningfully engage young people from marginalized communities into the conversation.
Oh wow, thank you so much, Kat. And you talked about two major themes, which is sustaining the leadership itself, and also carving out your own way. That's really beautiful because a lot of young people get into the spaces, and a lot of burnout is experienced from that, like trying to just push against a system that you have no direction to. And also, yeah, community solutions. How do we represent every voice, not just some voices? And how do we also acknowledge privilege and those people who are not well represented? I really love that. Back to you, Anne. Tell us what pulled you to this journey. What barriers exist? Do they still exist in your context?
Mm-hmm. I'll say just like everybody, it's that passion that just like calls you to it. It's that one thing you can't stop thinking about, even though you think about a lot of other things, and so you feel the need to do something about it. But just as Kat said, one of the biggest challenges on the continent has been funding. Mental health support is underfunded in such a way that it makes it even more challenging for us trying to find solutions to it, because we are then required to stretch ourselves in ways that we did not even imagine possible before. But what I've also loved about the experience though is that in my experience, it has led me to then think back and tap into like indigenous knowledge and try and understand how this support was, available before the kind of systems that are in place now were put in place. And so, yeah, it has been a lot of leaning into community support, finding ways to practice, I guess, as much boundaries as we can, whilst also doing our best to show up and provide support. Because just because I'm a mental health activist does not mean that my mental health isn't as important. And so, finding a way to find that balance in the midst of it all has been a challenge. But yeah, I think like everybody here, we just keep swimming against the tide and finding a way to keep going.
Oh wow! Thank you so much. And I think there are the words of Wangari Maathai that said, "You do what you can with what you have," and trying to make that work for you. And also, I loved that you brought in the systemic lens of standing on the giants of what have been before, be it academically, but also culturally. What were we doing? What systems were in place that we can be able to utilize now? Yes, I love that these ideas are being brought up, and the one particular one is that a young person does not exist just in one space like mental health. We come in with these very different facets. So I'd want us to ask, like, how these identities that we bear, so be it our gender, our race, our class, our mental health, our global location, how much do they shape how youth leaders are perceived, and how do you claim space anyway? So, all with all these identities that we bear and what we carry and we bring to the table, how do we reclaim that space? And Erica, I'd want to start with you. Given that Being also does a lot of work in many countries, which has different contexts and identities that show up, how do you encourage them to also claim space in the process?
Yeah, thanks, Judah. And I think this is a really great question. And I think it's sort of inevitable that identities will shape how leaders show up, but also how they're perceived. And oftentimes, these perceptions could even vary on the context or one's own lived experiences and identities. But I don't think that this necessarily has to be a bad thing. I really adhere to the mindset that we're all made up of our own lived experience and identities, regardless of what those are. And I think we could put a really positive spin on that. And I think it's important to claim space, not despite, but because of who you are, and really lean into that and lean into your lived experience to shape your work and how you show up as a leader. I think that's what makes us all really powerful and able to do the work that you're all doing. And so if I connect this to the work that Being is doing, whether it's our advisors or innovators, again, we're working across 12 countries. Each of the countries are very different, but even within each country, the communities differ a lot. And everyone really does bring a different and diverse perspective to the table. But I think that's what's really needed to drive change and innovation. And again, I see that as a really positive thing and try to keep that in mind.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that brilliant perspective, Erica. And rolling it to Jackie, because you also mentioned that you're youth change makers who are supporting change makers on the ground. So, how do you just go and allow those different identities to show up and also add to the conversation meaningfully?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Judah. I think, I take a lot from the sort of lived experience advocacy world in that, we're all here as young people speaking about youth leadership, but we can only speak about our own experiences. And one of the most important things that I hope you all can get out of this session is that young people are not a monolith, and you cannot expect a handful of young people to speak for, you know, you might have one young person from one country on your advisory board, and now they're supposed to speak for young people, for millions of young people. It's just, that's an incredibly frustrating perspective to take, but it's also, there are there are opportunities here, and we have to be able to balance that. We can only speak for our own experiences, but also to recognize where we need to make space for other people. And that's a lot of, I think, how I think about it at Generation Mental Health, is that I'm always trying to think about what are the processes that we have in place that are allowing young people from various backgrounds to be able to get the most out of their time working with us, and really be able to shape what we're doing, for it to be a space where people can show up as their authentic selves. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we are a youth-led organization. It's just a different vibe at the end of the day, where, I was just talking with someone today who was saying, that their mental health wasn't great right now and they needed to take a step back. And it's just those sorts of things are a lot more natural, I think, in youth-led spaces. And so insofar as other organizations can take some lead from young people in terms of how we relate to each other like that, I think that would be really helpful, and also create spaces for the large diversity of perspectives that we need in youth mental health to be able to feel confident and comfortable in those spaces. The last thing I'll say is that capacity strengthening plays such an important role here. Recognizing the strengths and capabilities that young people are bringing to the table, but also identifying those places where, if they're going to be stepping into a new environment, how do we make sure that they feel comfortable and confident in those environments to be able to speak their minds. And so that's a big part of the role we try to play, and try to bridge that gap that I think exists for a lot of young people, and particularly exists if they're coming from marginalized backgrounds.
Wow, thank you so much, Jackie. I've loved the idea, particularly of having a live system, a dynamic system that changes and incorporates people and adding those voices in and creating a rubric of how people can engage. I want to volley it to Anne, given that also here in the low and middle income countries, in addition to the identities, we also have some challenges that are very particular to us. But then also with that, we also have a lot of creativity, and the young people also have resources and different ways that they can rely on what you say, the like cultural evidence, historical evidence to come into these spaces. How do you promote spaces to bring all those identities together and acknowledge them?
Mhm. Yeah, I really love that question because we've been trying to do that. I mean, our mission on its own has already, we've decided to contextualize wellness to African women's realities. So we've tried to also narrow down our focus and say, when we think mental health, we want to solve mental health challenges on the continent, but in relation to how they affect African women. And that's broad if you're on the continent, because you understand that, we're all very different and very different identities, but there's so many things that we share within that. And when we have taken that approach, what we have done is we, for example, have conceptualized what we call creative transcendence, which is a program that uses creative tools for people to come together and, use like imagination tools and community gathering to understand trauma and figure out pathways on how to move from that shared trauma that we all experience, because again of like the systemic challenges that we face, right? So on the continent, you would find that there are people who struggle with each intergenerational mental health challenges, but they're all at the root cause of it are like the colonial challenges that we faced on the continent. And so it's hard to navigate that on your own. But when we create spaces for people who share those different challenges to come together, then we're able to sort of like imagine and figure out different pathways on us to heal. I think it's also when we then use like these different creative tools, we're basically saying solutions to your mental health challenges don't have to look a certain way. There are people who are not very comfortable with the solution that CBT therapy poses, which is, you getting sessions from a qualified therapist who can help you work through that. Some people have trauma that lives within the body, so they may need to work with a somatic therapist to help them, navigate that. And so when we approach mental health problem solving in the same way that we approach I guess engagement in general, where we understand, okay, people are different, people have different needs, people are suffering from the same challenge but in different ways, then we also become more creative in how we solve. Do we use play? Do we use traditional therapy? Do we use other imagination tools? There's so many of us available for us to tap into, and I think we just need to stop shying away from that and stop trying to stick to the script so much, because the script sort of like sustains the systemic challenges that we have. So yeah, I think the challenge is to us when we say we want to solve those problems, what other ways beyond what's already been given to us can we continue to make a change?
Thank you so much. And you highlighted the fact that we also use here in Kenya at Integrative Wellbeing. It's a three-pronged system of combining lived experience, land experience, and then shared experience as our community, and inviting all those opinions and perspectives from different people. Kat, last but not least on this question, various identities. I know you do amazing work at Embrace, even including the climate space and going out and trying to create what Anne was talking about, that community space. So how do you embrace all identities and make sure that they're showing up and the voices are being heard?
I think that like to appreciate the diversity, I feel like that it's not really that hard to be honest, I think that you just need to be very humble with what you know, and remain curious. Um, and yeah, I think like that's basically it. But if you want to ask about um, what sort, like whether identity could be a challenge in the context I'm operating in, then in Vietnam, I feel like age is a concept that a lot of people focus on. Like if you meet someone for the first time, um, there's a high chance that they're gonna ask you which year you're born, um, initially, and it's it's very it's very I would say strange, but also funny because like being a young person could be both a benefit and also a disadvantage because um, it's a benefit because I think generally mental health professionals and policymakers are tuning into youth knowledge more nowadays. But like Jackie said, and I also agree that youth knowledge cannot be represented as a monologue as by a small group of youth advisory council, and we have to expect that like um, we're only representing part of youth and we have to be like more open to more diverse voices. For example, I recently heard um, someone said that they should try to leverage mental health through social media, through AI, because young people love technology. Um, but that might not be completely true because a lot of youth have conflicts and ethical concerns with AI and with social media. Um, and being a young person, like I said, can also be a disadvantage because some of the times I feel like mental health professionals or academics who have higher qualification would think that young peoples are inexperienced or naive or um, ambitious or sensitive, and I don't completely disagree with them, but I think that there's a benefit to being foolish, because I'm a big believer in the saying, shoot for the moon, even if you miss your land among the stars. And that's what I'm trying to do in Vietnam.
Wow, we've just gotten a nice context of Vietnam. Be prepared to be asked about the year you were born, but also so much wisdom coming from that. Humility and remaining curious being the core ingredients of youth engagement. I love that. Like, embrace the bad stuff, embrace the failures, embrace the learnings, and start viewing them differently, because that's part of learning and that's part of how we go forward. I'd like to remind the audience, please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'd be happy to look at them after this. So please feel free to go to the chat option or the question option, and it's on the right side of your screen. Just pop your question there, and we'll get to them shortly. For the last segment of this panel question right now, I'd love to ask something that's very near and dear to me. When I started my own journey, I suffered a lot of burnout again. And Anne, you were talking about this before about, yeah, I was having all these ideas, working on all these avenues, trying to get a solution for everyone and making everything happen at the same time. And in Kenya, we have this saying, it's very colloquial. It says, itakuambaya. It vaguely translates to, it will be bad. And you can imagine trying to get solutions for hundreds and hundreds of people as one person. Obviously, it is draining for you. So, a very key component we want to ask today is yourself. How do you balance showing up for others while still figuring things out yourself? How do you hold space for your own well being as a leader and also just balancing that? How do you achieve that balance? I'd love to hear from everyone here, starting with Anne.
Who Judah, I relate with the burnout. And I think what has helped me has been me trying to remind myself constantly that I matter as well. Like my mental health matters as well. I do not need. And so again, when I reference the work that we're doing, we have intention as our value, and then we also have care. And when we define how we understand care, we always say that we don't do any of the work that we do to the detriment of ourselves, because we believe we also actually really matter in all of this. And and so I think a way to look at this and like approaching leadership and finding ways to not burn out is to not burden yourself with the need to solve everything, even though that's what we want to do, and it's hard to not want to solve everything. But we have to find ways to learn how to not want to solve everything, but rather focus on the role that we can play, and trust that there are other people who are also going to step up and do the work that they do. So I'm going to focus on doing the work, and I'm going to trust that the work that Erica does with funding, let's say, young people, then spills down to me, and then that aspect has been taken care of. But then I can collaborate with Jaclyn in terms of like supporting more youth leaders. And so there are just so many opportunities to be working with people, so you realize I don't actually need to be solving everything. We need to learn to step out and ask for help and ask for support, and find ways to share, and collaborate more. Because as young people, we speak a lot about collaboration, but I don't think we practice it as much. We expect it from like the older generation, when we like, oh, we want a seat at the table, collaborate with us. But we can also lead the charge for that, to say, in whatever small aspect that I'm working in, I'm trusting that this work is part of a larger picture. And as a result of that, I don't need to solve everything. I can just do what I can and trust that everybody else is doing the same. And, hopefully it's all part of this huge ripple effect across our communities. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was brilliant. Doing what you can and trusting in the ecosystem and learning to collaborate. Those are very, very good points. Going to Jackie, how do you maintain that balance?
Yeah, I'm thinking very similarly to what Anne is talking about. In particular, that at the end of the day, the thing that sustains me is like my team and the people that I've gotten to meet through this work. That it's like we're always sort of reminding each other, right? And like supporting each other in this process. And there's something really powerful about recognizing that like we are all working towards that North Star together, and we can't get there if we're all burnt out. So like there is real value to protecting yourself and your mental health and your time. And that's not to say I haven't struggled with that. Um, but I think that, yeah, I'm just like always leaning on my team and trying to create an environment where we can ask each other for help, but also trying to, yeah, sort of build those collaborations so that we can go out into the broader ecosystem and ask for help. But I think that's hard because we are trying to represent ourselves as people who know what we're doing, and we have to, contend with the expectation that we don't know what we're doing because we're young people. So it's definitely hard, and that's where I think youth-led organizations collaborating with each other is a really powerful opportunity.
Oh, I love that. Being satisfied with the situation that we may not know what we're doing and we are all working towards a certain goal and we need each other. I love that. Erica, over to you. How do you maintain the balance?
Yeah, thanks, Judah. And I love what Jackie and Anne have shared. And I think my thoughts kind of build on that. But I think it's important to remember that everyone is still figuring things out, and that doesn't make you less of a leader. I'm going to steal from Kat, I think, who shared in a LinkedIn post leading up to the webinar that people often associate leadership with a specific checklist. And I think that youth have like additional expectations put on them to kind of do things perfectly. But I really don't think that's the case. I think as a young leader, especially, it's okay to hold space for both truths. You can lead while also learning, asking questions, and being transparent about where you're at. And I think those are actually really important qualities. in a leader. So I think I try to remind that of myself is that like you don't have to reach these certain milestones to be a leader. You can be a leader in your everyday life within your organizations, regardless of your role or where you're at, from that perspective. And then again, I think what others have shared, especially working in mental health, our goal is often to support the mental health of others, but reminding yourself that you've got to take care of yourself and prioritize your own mental well-being. And in doing so, then you're able to show up better as a leader.
Oh wow, Erica, I'm loving the perspectives from everyone. I'm taking down so many notes. That leading is also consenting to learning and vulnerability and showing up and saying, yeah, I also am figuring this out. I love that. Over to you, Kat.
Yeah, thank you, Erica, for bringing it up. I agree with you that as young people, we're still figuring out, and it's okay to be transparent about where we're at. And in fact, I think being transparent has its benefits too, because in my case, I feel like by admitting that, okay, I'm not an expert, I'm still kind of dumb in these aspects, I can call out for mentorship. Like, I'm not I'm not so familiar with working with people with disabilities, and then I reach out to people who have that expertise and they help. And I'm a big believer in the fact that there are a lot of adults out there. I mean, by adults, I mean like people who are older than us, that really want to help. They just don't know how to help us, or like where we need help is. And we should be more comfortable reaching out to them, forging collaboration with them, not because we are younger, but because we want to add value ourselves, and they can help and they can chip in.
Oh wow, thank you. Yeah, that's being also open to mentorship and seeking help from the adults. I'm loving this conversation, and all of you, I think, have brought up those spaces of we need support and we need also to support each other, but also to seek support from people who have done it before. Yeah, which reminds me, before we go to the questions, we are having something for founders. So if you happen to be in Kenya by the end of September, just reach out. It will be on the circle on Gmail, and you can be able to come and feel supported and also contribute towards the conversation. Yes, this has been amazing. The panelists have spoken to us, and we want to hear from you. Going to the questions tabs, you can be able to add a question or like a question that has been added, and then we are going to be able to address it. For the first question of today, we have a question from Major Minor, and they ask, are there courses or tools that we can learn from on how to leverage lived experience in advocacy, and even guiding others on how to use or leverage lived experiences? Uh, and yeah, oh, thank you for this caveat. Not something that's hyped about, but courses or resources that offer meaningful impact. I know, Erica, you mentioned something about a report, so I'd want to give it to you first to address this question.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really great question. As I mentioned, Being did publish a report which we co-wrote with our advisors, kind of detailing our experience and approach to engaging youth across the funding cycle, which I think helps as a bit of a case study and can be a resource for others to learn from. But I think there are also some other really great resources out there. I know that GMAN has a really awesome webinar guidelines around effective youth engagement practices. Maybe we can put that in the chat. And there are a few others as well. Jackie, I think, and the initiative that you're part of, the Healthy Brains Initiative. I hope I got that right. HBGI, as well as there's a few others that I can think of and I can try to put in the chat, but there's lots of existing resources out there already that I would suggest people to kind of tap into as they're like setting up frameworks for how they might do this within their communities.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Jackie, over to you. I know also GenMH does a lot of work in engaging lived experience.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, Erica, you did a great job highlighting from the sort of organizational perspective, trying to engage lived experience and young people with lived experience of mental health challenges, those are really fantastic resources. I think from the perspective of individuals who are trying to leverage their lived experience for advocacy, GenMH is actually in the process and hopefully launching in the next 2 months an advocacy toolkit that will be focused on training young people with lived experience to get involved in advocacy. And that includes some modules on leveraging lived experience and storytelling. So definitely sign up for a newsletter if you haven't. I think that name looks familiar. So I think we've worked together already. So you'll get our email. But if anyone else is interested, definitely feel free to sign up for our newsletter and you'll hear more about it when it's launched.
Thank you. So I think I'd want to go to the next question as we continue this conversation later on the useful resources for the lived experience, especially courses. We have a question from Mark, and he asks that he wants to hear what will be especially impactful when we talk about ideas and innovations that we need to implement, and how different are they from the current systems and ways of doing stuff. So for Kat and Anne, I know you're at the forefront of implementation in most of your work. So what are these ideas and innovations that youth leaders believe need to be implemented, and how do they represent changes from the current approaches? Over to you, Anne.
I'll say a big change has, I think we also mentioned it earlier on, just like the general approach to leadership, where we're trying to move away from leadership that is so authoritative that people cannot share any ideas, people can't come in and build with you and support you on your journey. So we're trying to build leadership systems that encourage more collaboration, leadership systems that also do not demand too much from people that they leave them disempowered. So you'd realize that in a lot of youth-led organizations, we try to change the work culture. We're moving away from work cultures that are extremely toxic, that do not respect people's boundaries, or demand so much from people and give them little to nothing back. And so these are the different ideas that we have in our approach to just, I guess, problem solving in general, and making change. And I feel like it may be a bit challenging for us to make that change within the current system. And that's why it's important for us to, create our own system and not fight so hard to be integrated, into the system, but, lead the path to creating this entire new revolution where this is how we approach leadership. This is how we approach problem solving. And this is how we center youth in decision making, because young people are not, I think also another thing is we say youth like we're just this group of people that, I don't know, that just exist in this manner that does not allow us to solve problems or engage. But when we think about how we are the custodians of this current world, we're the ones who are going to have to answer to future generations 10, 20 years down the line, the same way we're holding the current leaders accountable to the kind of world that they've given us. I think when we start approaching it in that way, then maybe we'll realize that you're not doing us a favor but allowing youth to lead. We have to lead. We are part of this world and we should be shaping it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Over to you, Pam. What do you think needs to change? And I've seen an additional question of how can professionals support the work, especially in Asia? Oh, yeah, I think we are having a bit of technical issue, just a little, but we can move on to another question as we await Kat to answer that one. Is how do you evaluate youth engagement? How would you personally evaluate youth engagement? Starting with Erica, given the programs, how and spanning across all these countries, how do you evaluate youth engagement?
Yeah, that's a really great and I think loaded question that could be approached from a few different angles, but I think from my experience, the best way to kind of evaluate that and understand where you're at is to ask youth themselves and really be open to hearing and receiving the feedback that they'll share um, about their experiences being engaged. And so I think for me, that's kind of the key guiding approach to understanding and evaluating youth engagement in whatever way that looks. Did they feel represented and heard? Like they are their own experience, and like we have to trust what they share. And so for me, that's kind of the top thing that I would keep in mind as we evaluate youth engagement and if it's working and what we can do better.
Thank you so much, Erica. Anne, for you, how do you evaluate youth engagement?
Mhm. Yeah, so I know, I guess also when we implement programs, the first instinct is to count the number of people we've impacted or like, had attending the sessions. But I think another step is to then find a way to follow up and see who's actually implementing the tools that they were provided with. So how you see youth engagement is goes beyond just the amount of young people who are willing to be part of the conversation, but also the amount of young people who are able to take it a step further and say, this was the conversation, and this is how I'm going to implement, these aspects of that conversation in, say, my personal life or my community, and just those different areas that I exist in.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. I will continue this conversation on the circle, on different platforms, and keep on answering these questions. And thank you so much for your question. We are going to look into it. For now, I wanted to wrap up because of the time, and I want to ask a specific question to all our panelists. And you'd please complete this statement for me in one brief statement. So the statement starts like this: to support youth leadership, global mental health action, the network members must do what? So to support youth leadership, global mental health action network members must, and passing it over to Jackie.
Oh, putting me on the spot. I think after this conversation, my quick answer is that members must recognize that young people are experts in their experience, and in particular, young people who have experienced mental health challenges um, are experts in their experience, and that can include things beyond, engaging in the mental health system, right? That can include a lot of the sort of social determinants we think of, that there's like a broader context that young people are living in, and to um, go to young people for what they think will work in those contexts.
Oh, thank you. Over to you, Anne.
Mhm. I would say quite similar, really. Just continue finding opportunities to actually collaborate with young people and include them in key decision making processes because you need our input.
Oh, thank you. Over to you, Erica.
Yeah, thank you. Similar to others, I think GMAN members to support youth leadership should systematically champion meaningful youth inclusion from the system level and really hold themselves accountable for creating spaces where youth voices are valued, trusted, and feel empowered to develop and lead mental health solutions.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you. Over to you, Kat.
I think what our network can do is to engage young people into mental health advocacy, not because we are trying to check a box, we are trying to make our interventions more effective, but because we are potentially developing the next generation of mental health leaders as well.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much for your contributions today. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you so much, Kat. And thank you to everyone who has joined. We've really explored different themes, and we've really explored different perspectives from different areas of the world. And it has been very insightful for me. And to end this also, I'd say what I've learned today To support youth leadership, Global Mental Health Action Network members must hold learning and vulnerability together, and that joint support will leap forward and co-design and co-create solutions with the youth. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and looking forward to engaging and talking on the circle and all the other platforms. Asanteni sana. Have a lovely, lovely, lovely day ahead.